Okay, how's it going, y'all? So we're gonna read some Stalin. This is some early stuff. It's his second earliest release, after from editors. This is the Russian Social Democratic Party and its immediate task, and it appears that there are two different sections here. And it's kind of long, but we're gonna go ahead and try to get into this and see how much we can get out of it. Hopefully, I can get it into one reading without it taking too much space. Okay, let's go. Human thought was obliged to undergo considerable trials, suffering, and change before it reached scientifically elaborated and substantiated socialism. West European socialists were obliged for a long time to wander blindly in the wilderness of utopian parentheses impossible, impracticable socialism before they hewed a path for themselves, investigated and established the laws of social life, and hence mankind's need for socialism. Since the beginning of the last century, Europe has produced numerous brave, self-sacrificing, and honest scientific workers who tried to explain and decide the question as to what can rid mankind of the ills which are becoming increasingly intense and acute with the development of trade and industry. Many storms, many torrents of blood swept over Western Europe in the struggle to end the oppression of the majority by the minority, but sorrow remained undispelled, wounds remained unhealed, and pain became more and more unendurable with every passing day. We must regard as one of the principal reasons for this the fact that utopian socialism did not investigate the laws of social life. It soared higher and higher above life, whereas what was needed was firm contact with reality. The utopians set out to achieve socialism as an immediate object at a time when the ground for it was totally unprepared in real life. And what was more deplorable because of its results, the utopians expected that socialism would be brought into being by the powerful of this world, who they believed could easily be convinced of the correctness of the socialist ideal. Robert Owen, Louis Blanc, Fourier, and others. This outlook completely obscured from view the real labor movement and the masses of the workers, the only natural vehicle of the socialist ideal. The utopians could not understand this. They wanted to establish happiness on earth by legislation, by declarations, without the assistance of the people, the workers. They paid no particular attention to the labor movement, and often even denied its importance. As a consequence, their theories remained mere theories which failed to affect the masses of the workers, among whom, quite independently of these theories, matured the great idea proclaimed in the middle of the last century by the genius Karl Marx. Quote, the emancipation of the working class must be the act of the working class itself. Working men of all countries unite, end quote. These words brought out the truth, now evident even to the blind, that what was needed to bring about the socialist ideal was the independent action of the workers and their amalgamation into an organized force, irrespective of nationality and country. It was necessary to establish this truth, and this was magnificently performed by Marx and his friend Engels, in order to lay firm foundations for the mighty Social Democratic Party, which today towers like inexplorable fate over the European bourgeois system, threatening its destruction and the erection on its ruins of a socialist system. In Russia, the evolution of the idea of socialism followed almost the same path as that in Western Europe. In Russia, too, socialists were obliged for a long time to wander blindly before they reached social democratic consciousness, scientific socialism. Here, too, there were socialists and there was a labor movement, but they marched independently of each other, going separate ways. The socialists towards utopian dreams, Zemlya I Voya, Narodnaya Voya, and the labor movements towards spontaneous revolts. Both operated in the same period, 70s and 80s. Ignorant of each other, the socialists had no roots among the working population, and consequently, their activities were abstract, futile. The workers, on the other hand, lacked leaders, organizers, and consequently their movement took the form of disorderly revolts. This was the main reason why the heroic struggle that the socialists waged for socialism remained fruitless, and why their legendary courage was shattered against the solid wall of autocracy. The Russian socialists established contact with the masses of the workers only at the beginning of the 90s. They realized that salvation lay only in the working class, and that this class alone would bring about the socialist ideal. Russian social democracy now concentrated all its efforts and attention upon the movement that was going on among the Russian workers at that time. Still inadequately class-conscious and ill-equipped for the struggle, the Russian workers tried gradually to extricate themselves from their hopeless position and to improve their lot somehow. There was no systematic organizational work in that movement at the time. Of course, The movement was a spontaneous one. And so, social democracy set to work upon this unconscious, spontaneous, and unorganized movement. It tried to develop the class consciousness of the workers, tried to unite the isolated and sporadic struggles of individual groups of workers against individual masters to combine them in a common class struggle, in order that it might become the struggle of the Russian working class against the oppressing class of Russia. And it tried to give this struggle an organized character. In the initial stages, social democracy was unable to spread its activities among the masses of the workers, and it, therefore, confined its activities to propaganda and agitation circles. The only form of activity it engaged in at that time was to conduct study circles. The object of these circles was to create among workers themselves a group that would subsequently be able to lead the movement. Therefore, these circles were made up of advanced workers. Only chosen workers could attend them. But soon, the study circles period passed away. Social democracy soon felt the necessity of leaving the narrow confines of the circles and of spreading its influence among the broad masses of the workers. This was facilitated by external conditions. At that time, the spontaneous movement among the workers rose to an exceptional height. Who of you does not remember the year when nearly the whole of Tiflis was involved in the spontaneous movement? Unorganized strikes at the tobacco factories and in the railway workshops followed one after another. Here it happened in 1897 through 98. In Russia, it happened somewhat earlier. Timely assistance was needed, and social democracy hastened to render that assistance. A struggle started for a shorter working day, for the abolition of fines, for higher wages, and so forth. Social democracy well knew that the development of the labor movement could not be restricted to these petty demands, that these demands were not the goal of the movement, but only a means of achieving the goal. Even if these demands were petty, even if the workers themselves in individual towns and districts were now fighting separately, that fight itself would teach the workers that complete victory would be achieved only when the entire working class launched an assault against its enemy as a united, strong, and organized force. This fight would also show the workers that in addition to their immediate enemy, the capitalists, they have another, still more vigilant foe, the organized force of the entire bourgeois class. The present capitalist state, with its armed forces, its courts, police, prisons, and gendarmerie. If even in Western Europe the slightest attempt at the workers to improve their condition comes into collision with the bourgeois power, if in Western Europe, where human rights have already been won, the workers are obliged to wage a direct struggle against the authorities, how much more so must the workers in Russia in their movement inevitably come into collision with the autocratic power, which is the vigilant foe of every labor movement. Not only because this power protects the capitalists, but also because as an autocratic power, it cannot resign itself to the independent action of social classes, particularly to the independent action of a class like the working class, which is more oppressed and downtrodden than other classes. That is how Russia's social democracy perceived the course of the movement, and it exerted all its efforts to spread these ideas among the workers. Herein lay its strength, and this explains its great and triumphant development from the very outset, as was proved by the great strike of the workers in the St. Petersburg weaving mills in 1896. But the first victories misled and turned the heads of certain weaklings, just as the utopian socialists in their time had concentrated their attention exclusively on the ultimate goal and dazzled by it, totally failed to see or denied the real labor movement that was developing under their very eyes. So certain Russian social democrats, on the contrary, devoted all their attention exclusively to the spontaneous labor movement, to its everyday needs. At that time, 5 years ago, the class consciousness of the Russian workers was extremely low. The Russian workers were only just awakening from their age-long sleep, and their eyes, accustomed to darkness, failed, of course, to register all that was happening in a world that had become revealed to them for the first time. Their needs were not great, and so their demands were not great. The Russian workers still went no further than to demand slight increases in wages or a reduction of the working day. That it was necessary to change the existing system, that it was necessary to abolish private property, that it was necessary to organize a socialist system. Of all this, the masses of the Russian workers had no inkling. They scarcely dared to think about abolishing the slavery in which the entire Russian people were submerged under the autocratic regime, to think about freedom for the people, to think about the people taking part in the government of the country. And so, while one section of Russian social democracy deemed its duty to carry its socialist ideas into the labor movement, the other part absorbed in the economic struggle, the struggle for partial improvements in the conditions of the workers, as for example, reduction of the working day and higher wages, was prone to forget entirely its great duty and its great ideals. Echoing their like-minded friends in Western Europe called Bernsteinians, they said, "For us, The movement is everything. The final aim is nothing. They were not in the least interested in what the working class was fighting for so long as it fought. The so-called farthing policy developed things reached such a pass that one day the St. Petersburg newspaper Robochaya Missil announced, "Our political program is a 10-hour day and the restitution of the holidays that were abolished by the law of June 2nd. Instead of leading the spontaneous movement, instead of imbuing the masses with social democratic ideals and guiding them towards the achievement of our final aim, this section of the Russian Social Democrats became a blind instrument of the movement. It blindly followed in the wake of the inadequately educated section of the workers and limited itself to formulating those needs and requirements of which the masses of the workers were conscious at the time. In short, it stood and knocked at an open door, not daring to enter the house. It proved incapable of explaining to the masses of the workers either the final aim, socialism, or even the immediate aim, the overthrow of the autocracy. And what was still more deplorable, it regarded all this as useless and even harmful. It looked upon the Russian workers as children and was afraid of frightening them with such daring ideas. Nor is this all. In the opinion of a certain section of social democracy, it was not necessary to wage a revolutionary struggle to bring about socialism. All that was needed, in their opinion, was the economic struggle, strikes and trade unions, consumers and producers, cooperative societies. And there you have socialism. It regarded as mistaken the doctrine of the old international social democracy that a change in the existing system and the complete emancipation of the workers were impossible until political power had passed into the hands of the proletariat, the dictatorship of the proletariat. In its opinion, there was nothing new in socialism, and, strictly speaking, it did not differ from the existing capitalist system. It could easily fit into the existing system. Every trade union and even every cooperative store or producer's cooperative society was already, quote, a bit of socialism, end quote, they said. They imagined that by means of this absurd patching of old clothes, they could make new garments for suffering mankind. But most deplorable of all, and in itself unintelligible to revolutionaries, is the fact that this section of the Russian Social Democrats have expanded the doctrine of their Western European teachers, Bernstein and company, to such a degree that they brazenly state that political freedom, freedom to strike, freedom of association, freedom of speech, is compatible with Tsarism, and therefore a political struggle as such, the struggle to overthrow the autocracy, is quite superfluous. Because if you please, the economic struggle, it's right superfluous because, if you please, the economic struggle alone is enough to achieve the aim. It is enough for strikes to occur more often, despite government prohibition, for the government to tire of punishing the strikers, and in this way, freedom to strike and to hold meetings will come of its own accord. Thus, these alleged, quote, social democrats argued that the Russian workers should devote all their strength and energy entirely to the economic struggle and should refrain from pursuing all sorts of lofty ideals. In practice, their actions found expression in the view that it was their duty to conduct only local activities in this, or that town. They displayed no interest in the organization of a social democratic workers' party in Russia. On the contrary, they regarded the organization of a party as a ridiculous and amusing game which would hinder them in the execution of their direct duty to wage the economic struggle, strikes and more strikes, and the collection of kopecks for strike funds. Such was the alpha and omega of their activities. You will no doubt think that since they have whittled down their tasks to such a degree, since they have renounced social democratism, these worshippers of the spontaneous, quote, movement would have done a great deal, at least, for that movement. But here, too, we are deceived. The history of the St. Petersburg movement convinces us this. Its splendid development and bold progress in the early stages in 1895-97 was succeeded by blind wandering, and finally the movement came to a halt. This is not surprising. All the efforts of the economists to build up a stable organization for the economic struggle invariably came up against the solid wall of the government and were always shattered against it. The frightful regime of police persecution destroyed all possibility of any kind of industrial organization, nor did the strikes bear any fruit, because out of every 100 strikes, 99 were strangled in the clutches of the police. Workers were ruthlessly ejected from St. Petersburg, and the revolutionary energy was pitilessly sapped by prison walls and Siberian frost. We are profoundly convinced that this check, relative, of course, to the movement, was due not only to external conditions, the police regime, it was due no less to the check in the development of the very ideas of the class consciousness of the workers, and hence to the waning of their revolutionary energy. Although the movement was developing, the workers could not widely understand the lofty aims and content of the struggle because the banner under which the Russian workers had to fight was still the old faded rag, with its farthing motto, the economic struggle. of the economic struggle. Consequently, the workers were bound to wage the struggle with reduced energy, reduced enthusiasm, reduced revolutionary striving, for great energy is engendered only for a great aim. But the danger that threatened this movement as a result of this would have been greater had not our conditions of life, day by day, and with increasing persistence, pushed the Russian workers towards the direct political struggle. Even a small, simple strike brought the workers right up against the question of our lack of political rights, brought them into collision with the government and the armed forces, and glaringly revealed how inadequate the economic struggle was by itself. Consequently, despite the wishes of these social democrats, the struggle day by day increasingly assumed a distinctly political character. Every attempt of the awakened workers openly to express their discontent with the existing economic and political conditions under which the Russian workers are groaning today. Every attempt to free themselves from this yoke impelled the workers to resort to demonstrations of a kind in which the economic aspect of the struggle faded out more and more. The 1st of May celebrations in Russia laid the road to political struggle and to political demonstrations, and to the only weapon they possessed in their struggle in the past, the strike. The Russian workers added a new powerful weapon, the political demonstration, which was tried for the first time during the Great Kharkov May Day rally in 1900. Thus, thanks to its internal development, the Russian labor movement proceeded from propaganda and study circles in the economic struggle by means of strikes to political struggle and agitation. This transition was markedly accelerated when the working class saw in the arena of the struggle elements from other social classes in Russia, marching with firm determination to win political freedom. Okay, yeah, so that's the Russian Social Democratic Party and its immediate task by Joseph Stalin. Next, we'll read part 2. It's a shorter section, but it's an important piece to understand the development of it. It's second piece out by Stalin. Y'all follow me online: Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Tumblr, Medium. All of these are Marxist. Hit me up there. Y'all have a great day. Do lado going.